Welcome to Sound Bites, hosted by registered dietitian nutritionist Melissa Joy Dobbins. Let's delve into the science, the psychology, and the strategies behind good food and nutrition.
Hello and welcome to the Sound Bites podcast. Today's episode is about fresh, lean pork's role in plant-forward eating patterns and what you may not know about the role of pork in many cultural cuisines all over the world. We're also sharing an exciting announcement, and Sound Bites podcast listeners are some of the first to hear it. More on that in a bit. My guest today is Kara Behlke-Ungerman, Vice President of Nutrition, Health, and Wellness Transformation at the National Pork Board. In her role, she provides strategic direction and oversight for human nutrition, health, and well-being initiatives, including research projects, communications, and marketing. In addition, she integrates agriculture, food, health, and nutrition concepts into her work with both a consumer focus and science-relevant perspective. Kara is a former supermarket dietitian, just like myself, and prior to the National Pork Board, Kara worked at Schnucks Markets in a variety of positions, as well as Hy-Vee as a registered dietitian and the New York Beef Industry Council as the Director of Nutrition Education. She has a bachelor's in dietetics from the University of Nebraska, Lincoln, and completed a dietetic internship at Yale Medical Center. Originally from Benkelman, Nebraska, Kara currently resides in Des Moines, Iowa. Welcome to the show, Kara.
Thanks, Melissa, for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
I am looking forward to our conversation, and we have a lot of synergies and similarities in our backgrounds besides being supermarket dietitians. I was born in Iowa and I lived in Nebraska. So I'm looking forward to hearing more about your background. But before that, I want our listeners to know that this episode is sponsored by the National Pork Board, and we are also submitting this episode to the Commission on Dietetic Registration for one free continuing education unit for registered dietitian nutritionists, dietetic technicians registered, and certified diabetes care and education specialists. So if that is of interest to you, stay tuned for that. You can always check my free CEU page at soundbitesrd.com/free CEUs to see what episodes are currently available. So Kara, I would love for you to share more information about your background and your professional experience. We've chatted about this a little bit before, and I find it very interesting. So I want our listeners to get a glimpse into that as well.
Yeah, I would love to. And I think my professional experience, I always love hearing from other dietitians and the paths that they've taken.
Mm-hmm.
So I think you gave good headlines of all of that and would love to dive into that a little deeper. But I think first, a little bit unique about me, we'll go way back. Let's go way back to growing up and where I grew up, because I think it's a bit unique as a dietitian and brings a different perspective to the work that I do each and every day. But I actually grew up on a farm and ranch in rural Nebraska. So we had row crops and cows and lived the farm life. So I had two older brothers. I just remember always being outside playing with them, spent time roaming around the farm, playing hide and seek in our trees that stretched as far as the eye could see out in front of our house. And we had so many animals. I can remember, as a 3-year-old, I had more cats than I could count. And as a 3-year-old, I couldn't count very many, but we had a lot of cats. And just playing on the farm, I think, led to a lot of my creativity and just the expansiveness of thinking and trying to create solutions with what you had, because, you're out on the farm, kind of, away from town. And so what kind of fun, creative things could you come up with? So a few things I remember is my brothers and I, again, we're always constructing something on the farm. And so when we got older, we got into building zip lines from our apple tree. So we created a zip line, again, to have some fun and just kind of being like ingenious with what we had available to us.
Mm-hmm.
But then, we'd construct the land skis to pull behind our 4-wheeler. We'd be playing basketball in the building. And then one winter, I remember this vividly. So I will admit, I always thought I was going to be a world famous ice skater and go to the Olympics. And so for Christmas, my brothers built me an ice rink out front.
Oh.
So they moved some dirt. They tried to fill it with water and let it freeze so I could fulfill my Olympic dreams. It did not work, but we had fun trying. So I just think about all of these, different things that we did on the farm, and it just helped foster my creativity. And really, I think, inspired my zest for creative solutions. And then, of course, you have the obvious where it really grounded me in the understanding of what it's like to grow up on a farm. And, not every dietitian or health professional has that experience.
Right, for sure. And that's why it's so important to have voices like yours in this space, really value your experience and perspective that you bring to the table. And I have 2 older brothers too, so we have another thing in common. How much older were they?
Oh my goodness. 2 years and 4 years. We were all spaced out evenly 2 years.
Okay, yeah. We were a little closer in age than that, but yeah. It's kind of interesting being the youngest and being a girl. I'll just leave it at that. But
yes, it is.
Sounds like you had a lot of fun, and that's great.
And sometimes, that's when I would go in boss mode and telling them what to do. It was either the youngest or the oldest. The one in the middle is always the mediator. But yeah, the oldest and youngest, it was who's in charge around here.
Well, that's funny. Our middle one was always the instigator, so I'm going to leave that there. Oh, but we love him. So how did you first become interested in nutrition? Tell me a little bit more about your education path.
I became interested in nutrition just through, I wanted to be pre-med and become a doctor. And so I really liked the side of preventative medicine. So obviously, you have the need, and I think many dietitians, or the desire rather, to help people. And pre-med, becoming a doctor, was the route I saw. And of course, you take those personality tests in high school that match you with the ideal career, and it sends you down a path. And so that's kind of where I started off. But when I got to school, I realized, oh, wow, there's a whole side of like preventative medicine, and understanding more about nutrition is where I really began to resonate and feel like, oh, this is a good place for me. So that's kind of where I got my interest. And I've always loved food. I've always enjoyed cooking. And I always, enjoyed the connection and happiness that would bring to people if you take them food or you cook for them. And I learned that from my mom. And to this day, she is always cooking things, whether she's cooking a chicken noodle soup for a wedding, whether she's, baking a pie for someone's birthday locally. Like, she is always cooking, and she finds so much pleasure and meaning in that I think, again, it was just natural for her to instill that into me. And I feel like I owe a lot of that credit to her. And that's kind of where my interest in food came from.
Oh, it's wonderful. Is there anything that you wanted to share about your previous jobs? I know you were at Schnucks for quite a while. You were working beyond the dietitian realm. I mean, you were doing a lot of marketing. I'd love to have you share a little bit about that.
Yeah, I would love to share more about that role. It was fascinating. And I would say not the journey I expected to be on as a dietitian. Like I said, not the traditional route that I envisioned for myself, but loved the journey that I was on. So when I started out there at Schnucks, we were building an in-store dietitian program. I came from Hy-Vee and was an in-store dietitian in the Cedar Rapids area. And so went to Schnucks and was helping build out what their program looked like. They didn't have a dietitian. And so started out doing that. And then after about a year, I was recruited to come into marketing, and not as a dietitian reporting into marketing. This was actually a marketing role, overseeing the brand strategy and overseeing advertising, marketing. So all of your TV, radio, outdoor ads, all of that stuff, and going through a brand relaunch. So I actually wasn't practicing as much as a dietitian, where I was full-time trying to figure out marketing. So taking online courses, in-person classes, reading books, podcasts, just trying to figure out as much as I could about brand marketing, but was really helping lead those efforts under a new chief marketing officer at the organization. Really, again, taking my nutrition knowledge, and it was a big change for people. They were like, why are you going into marketing? And really, the way I thought about it, some of the underlying principles of nutrition and marketing are kind of similar, and it's about behavior change, right? And so if you use marketing for good, you're trying to create a behavior change, right, in a consumer. Same thing with nutrition. When you're trying to get them to eat healthier or support their current lifestyle, you're helping them create a healthier behavior change. So I saw a lot of similarities, and I was also, the reason that really interests me was there was actually a lot of science to marketing that I never realized.
Interesting.
Yeah, I really enjoyed that. And I would say, again, it was just diving in, trying to figure it out and learning as quick as I could on my feet. And I'll never forget the first TV commercial I made. And it wasn't actually one commercial. It was 7 vignettes within one. So it's like I produced 7 commercials in one. And the casting list was huge. I had puppies, I had children, I had probably everything you shouldn't start with, but so proud of that work. And, creating a commercial and seeing it on air, there's nothing like it. But again, it was enhancing my skills along the way. And I could bring that nutrition dietitian mindset to it, but also grow within an organization as well.
Very cool. So let's talk about the National Pork Board and your role there. How long have you been there, and what do you focus on in your role as VP of Nutrition, Health, and Wellness?
Well, I've been here just about 3 years this summer, and I oversee and provide strategic direction for all things related to human nutrition, health, and wellness initiatives and programs here at the National Pork Board. And really, I represent the 60,000 pork producers in America through the Pork Checkoff program. And what that means is these pork producers, I represent them through the checkoff dollars that they pay, and we invest those dollars in human nutrition-related activities. We're looking at doing good work, and the good work that's already being done in the health and wellness space, the work that you're doing and others listening, and how can we amplify those efforts. And my role specifically is really primarily focused on fresh lean pork versus processed pork. So lean cuts like pork tenderloin, loin roast, pork chops, all those lean cuts. How do they fit within, a healthy eating pattern and healthy diets, and what kind of research needs to be done on that? So that's a primary focus of, what I do in most of my efforts.
Yeah. And I've talked about checkoff programs on the podcast before, not necessarily always using that term, but it's where the farmers pool their money together so that they get more leverage with just investing in research and marketing, because they don't have much to have a margin to do that on their own. So they're stronger as a group. That's the same as it was when I worked for the Dairy Council. I know that's how that is with the Beef Council, but you can correct me if I said anything wrong, Kara.
No, I think that's a good description of it. And, on behalf of the industry, we're looking at the long term. And when it comes to health and wellness, how can we improve our practices or improve our product and do our part to create, a better world? And that may sound lofty, but truly I mean it, because we think, at the National Pork Board and on behalf of the industry, that putting health at the heart of what we do is the right thing to do. It's just a modern way of doing business, and we really want to be part of the solution because we're helping to feed and nourish the world, and we want to be part of that solution. We don't want to be a source of the problem. So again, our investments in health and wellness is we want to know what we can do better. We want ideas for improvement, and then we want to partner with people who can, help us make that work happen. So again, really looking at, the long-term viability of the industry is a lot of the work that we do.
Absolutely. And before we move on to other questions that I have for you, I'd like to talk a little bit more about dietitians like yourself who are working in the food industry. I'd love for you to share some of your thoughts and perspective on the importance of that and the role that dietitians can play in the food industry, and also a little bit more maybe about the research in general that the National Pork Board helps fund. I always like to talk about industry-funded research on the podcast just to help our listeners understand, whether they're the general public or other healthcare professionals, the landscape of industry-funded research and the importance of that.
Well, as a dietitian, it's always important, and we all, I think, listening would agree that we lead with the science. That's what our profession is based upon, and that's what I agree with here at the National Pork Board. So we have to lead with the science. We also, again, being a dietitian, having worked in the food industry, and now at the National Pork Board, we produce a product for consumption. So it's our responsibility to understand specifically here how pork fits into a healthy eating pattern. And so when you're a dietitian representing a food or a commodity board, I think it's important to, again, start with the science, lead with the science, understand that product's role within consumers' eating habits, and looking for ways to enhance it and ways for it to fit into a healthy eating pattern.
Okay.
And in regards to industry-funded research, we have developed research integrity guidelines that help guide and direct us. So we have a commitment and a focus on continuous improvement from farm to fork, and our checkoff research funds are investing in independent research studies focused on human nutrition as well as other key areas like animal welfare, disease prevention, genetics. But in order to maintain the integrity and transparency in the conduct of this research, and of course, help minimize the potential for bias, the National Pork Board abides by research integrity guidelines And one example of that is requiring the control of both study and design and research itself remain with the researchers.
Okay, great. Thank you for sharing that. And, I know we're going to continue this conversation throughout the rest of this interview, but is there anything specific that you wanted to share about areas of focus that you have right now?
Yeah. Well, when I first came to the National Pork Board, again, we were evaluating how we want to invest in human nutrition research. There was a question of, should we be investing? Are we investing too much? Are we investing too little? And this stimulated a lot of different discussions. And what we discovered is that there is a lot more that is to be discovered about our product. So our board did recently commit to investing more in nutrition research. So we completed about 3 phases of nutrition research strategy to help develop where we focus and what key questions that we wanted to answer. And again, that was conducted with a lot of input from registered dietitians, health professionals, industry folks, just trying to get a landscape assessment of what are the key questions related to pork and health that we wanted to research. And we even went outside non-traditional aspects. And I remember talking with anthropologists and food historians and really diving deep and even looking globally, like what are some of those big global questions, even though we serve U.S. pork producers. Pork is actually, you might be surprised to know, the most consumed protein worldwide. And of course, that means it's an important component of so many cultures, meaning that is an important food for many different cultures, even within the United States. So again, this was probably about 6 months to a year's worth of work just trying to evaluate what are the key questions that we want to ask ourselves. And we did come up with our focus areas. And one of our first focus areas for human nutrition research is establishing pork's role in healthy eating patterns across cultures, across life stages, and across socioeconomic status. Like I said, many don't know that pork is so widely consumed across the globe. And so how do we look at those healthy eating patterns across cultures is a big part of our focus area. We're also focused on understanding pork's role as an environmentally sustainable protein because we believe pork can deliver on that nutritional quality. It's also highly accessible, affordable. And then if you factor in the cultural applicability, how does that all play into a sustainable nutrition conversation instead of just looking at, carbon or greenhouse gas emissions and framing up sustainability that way? But how do you start to bring nutrition into those conversations to supplement that knowledge? So that's another big focus area for us. And then our last research focus area is pioneering new research methodologies using precision nutrition. So doing so, we want to explore the nutritional value of pork specific to health outcomes. So this is where, you kind of dip your toe in the water a little bit. You kind of explore what's out there. So we're doing some work in the areas of cognition that's quite exciting. But again, trying to lean into precision nutrition and see, where our role is and what health outcomes we can measure related to pork consumption. And it's kind of funny because some of my producers, they've been doing precision ag on the farm for so many years. And so it's exciting for them to see how, we're leaning into precision nutrition.
Yes, and I know we're going to talk a little bit about agriculture and on-farm questions that I have to share with the listeners. But can you say just a little bit more about precision ag? Is that dealing with technology in the business of agriculture?
Yeah, when it comes to precision ag, I think the easiest example for people to understand when I have friends or cousins come to the farm and you're out on a tractor or combine and now you have GPS that can guide and direct, when you're on a combine harvesting the crops and it's telling your bushels, your moisture, your yield, and it's telling you all of this like live in real time. And it's actually even guiding the tractor where you don't have to necessarily steer. So I think all of this technology, people are always surprised that agriculture has so much technology. I don't know why it's a surprise. Again, when you grow up with it, you're used to seeing that. But I think, it's been a discussion within the ag industry for a long time. And the other great example was more recently. So we were conducting a virtual farm tour and we had some agency partners and they were surprised when they saw how the pigs were fed in the barns and the precision that goes into exactly how much is fed, what the rations are, how much feed and everything. It's just precisely calculated and delivered based upon that specific pig, the exact nutrient requirements. So again, the precision to which it's calculated and then distributed, I think always surprises people because, we always ask ourselves, well, why can't you do that with humans? Well, I think it's very different. for many, many reasons, but I don't think they understand the technology and the savvy that producers and farmers have on their farm.
Right. I agree. One more question before we get into some details about pork, including some common myths and misperceptions that might surprise our listeners. You guys are launching a new program called Pork and Partners. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Pork and Partners, this is all about building connection and building community. So we're very excited to create a program for health professionals. And it's also about networking to grow your skills. And of course, it's about knowledge building and sharing your knowledge, because I believe we all have a lot to learn from each other and we can all help each other grow. We just need a place and a platform to do it. So really, that's what Pork and Partners is all about. It's to help healthcare professionals meet the demands of everyday practice while also providing opportunities for dietitians to connect and earn those continuing education credits.
Okay.
Through Pork and Partners, we are going to be launching a website where you can stay up to date with all of the latest topics, where we'll be providing meaningful resources to help expand your knowledge. And again, this is based on topics of interest. So we actually went out, asked dietitians, what is it that you want to know more about? What skills are you missing? Or even what skills are missing from the profession that we can help build and provide those opportunities to dietitians. So that will be, on the website. There will, of course, be other resources. There'll be on-demand webinars. There'll be handouts and recipes. We'll also host in-person events. So if you sign up for Pork and Partners, you'll be the first to hear about these in-person events that we will be doing. We'll have dietitian to dietitian chat series. So again, all sorts of fun and engaging ways to kind of come together as a profession, talk about these topics. And we'll also have a presence on Instagram to maybe dive a little bit deeper into topics in a place where we feel comfortable sharing and discussing. Because again, we want to be part of this solution and helping to develop dietitians. So we want to know what topics are important and what we can provide to help grow dietitians within our profession.
Very cool. Oh, I look forward to seeing more about that and hearing more about that. So this is one of my favorite questions that I like to ask. What might surprise our listeners, whether they're the general public individual or a dietitian or some other healthcare professional? What might surprise them to learn about pork? I'm already, my interest is piqued at several things that you've already said. But what have you found in your consumer and health professional research?
Hands down, for consumers, when I tell them that pork tenderloin is as lean as boneless, skinless chicken breast, that surprises them. Like, that has been a sticky message that I've had multiple people, they just can't get that out of their head when they go to the grocery store. So I found that even though I think as dietitians, I'm like, wow, we've heard that a lot. Pork tenderloin is as lean as boneless, skinless chicken breast. But I think there's a lot of people out there, consumer-wise, that actually don't know that. So that is a surprising statement, as simple as it may seem. Mm-hmm. But when it comes to registered dietitians, internal research indicates that dietitians highly rate the nutrients found in pork, but are less familiar with pork compared to other animal proteins. So they understand, I think, the nutrition, but they're just less familiar. So it's something that they don't consume as often. And then interestingly, too, they rate pork lower in nutritional value. So if they're forced to rank it compared to other proteins, they actually rank pork lower, but they respond very positively to nutrient-focused pork messaging. Mm-hmm. So it's a bit of a paradox, but I think, again, it shows that, there's a learning opportunity there as well for how we educate consumers and clients.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, a lot of times it's how you ask the question. And I love getting into insights like this because usually there's a surprising factor there, but then also it provides information on, okay, what do we do moving forward? Where do we need to fill some of these gaps, whether it's awareness or knowledge or just practice?
Well, exactly.
Yeah. So with the pork tenderloin being as lean as a boneless, skinless chicken breast and very easy to cook, we talk about seafood on the podcast all the time and people are afraid to cook it when it's very easy to cook. But pork is maybe a little bit more forgiving, like chicken, where you still have to cook it to the proper temperature and things like that. But it's easier to maybe not overcook it from my own personal experience.
Yeah, that's actually quite common, again, among registered dietitians, and they're not always familiar and they're not very comfortable with how to select and cook pork. So it comes down to selection, and again, having worked for the beef industry, selecting meat is always a challenge for consumers. And I think even dietitians sometimes struggle with how to select it and then how to cook pork. Again, cooking it to 145 degrees. If you're cooking a pork tenderloin, that's a perfect temperature that you want to cook it to for a safe eating experience. But then, like you said, if you're not comfortable with it, how are you going to counsel patients on it? So that was a big learning we saw from the research is, okay, we need to help familiarity when it comes to selecting and cooking pork.
Mm-hmm.
And again, it's really tasty and it's the most consumed protein worldwide. So it's obviously an important component of so many cultures. So that's another opportunity for us. It's an important food for many different cultures within the US, because if you look at it globally and how highly consumed it is, well, there's a high chance that dietitians are counseling or interacting with patients that come from diverse backgrounds. So how can we teach dietitians how to cook with pork from different cultures and cuisines to build their confidence and their skills?
Absolutely. That was one of the surprising things that I learned from you, is that it's the most consumed protein worldwide. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about how it is a key protein food for different cultures within the US and globally, if you can share some of that.
Yeah, well, let's go way back, because for centuries, pork has been an essential part of diets around the world. Even the Romans, I think it fueled their strength because it provides a delicious, nutrient-dense foundation for meals in many types of cultures and benefits the health of people of all ages. So the current consumption of pork globally is around 22 kilograms per capita, so pretty high consumption. Just think about the culturally specific recipes that are developed throughout the world and making those a key source of protein. So a few of them that we like to talk about, the kalua pig is a traditional Hawaiian preparation of a whole pig inside a large pit heated with lava and rocks and covered with banana leaves. So that's a very traditional Hawaiian preparation. You also have the Cubans who continue to eat a lot of pork, and lechon asado is a pork roast made by Cubans. It's both a tradition and a feast. And if you look at Korea, they eat a lot of fresh pork as well. And so we're actually looking at some research that looks at how Asian cultures, how they eat pork differently with more of a focus on fresh pork consumption. And again, we're trying to see what we can learn from that and what can then be applied to, the United States in practice and, helping enhance our knowledge. And then when you look at America, we think about barbecue. So we look at, smoked pork shoulder cooked with hickory or oak and wood chips, and the popularity of smoking it continues to rise. So that's just a few examples of how pork fits into a variety of different cultures. And I'm sure as you're listening, you can think about all the different tastes and flavors that go along with that. And I think one thing that was unique that I learned, and again, was very interesting, is the flavor of pork. So there's hundreds of different flavor nuances to pork, which is why it makes such a good, friend to all foods and makes such a nice pair to so many dishes. And it's really one of those foods that you can eat at breakfast, lunch, and dinner that you can't do with all proteins. But I think it's the flavors in pork that really kind of differentiate it. So we'll do some more research around flavor just to understand why is it so unique to pork, and how does eating pork actually help you consume more underconsumed nutrients or fruits and veggies just by the addition of that to one of your dishes. So we're looking at pork as sort of what we call this carrier food to see if you can in fact eat more fruits and vegetables just by including pork. I also want to mention that fresh pork fits a variety of budgets. Some of our new research looks at the nutritional value and affordability of a thrifty food plan that features fresh pork. Fresh pork actually fits into the lowest cost, healthy diet that meets all the nutrient requirements, followed by dietary guidance, and is respective of existing eating habits.
Absolutely. Well, that brings me to my next question. I talk about protein a lot on the podcast, but we know that pork is not just a source of protein. It has other nutrients, but I would love to hear you detail that out for our listeners. What else comes in that nutrient package? What nutrients, vitamins, minerals, high quality protein do we get with fresh lean pork?
I think this is a great conversation to have, because seeing how not only in the profession, but just overall, the conversation is beginning to shift from just focusing on nutrients, right? So focusing the research or communications or education efforts just on nutrients, to looking at the effective foods. So looking at, the food matrix and understanding what affects do food have on health?
Mm-hmm.
So again, I think as dietitians, we've probably all seen that transition and understand that there's more to food than just the nutrients that it contains. So we are looking at research to understand, the whole role of pork as a food in the diet. But when it comes specific to nutrients that people might not be aware of, to be honest, pork actually contains 11 key nutrients. It's obviously an excellent source of protein. I think most people know and understand that.
Mm-hmm.
But it's also an excellent source of thiamine, riboflavin, niacin, vitamin B6, B12, and selenium. And selenium, and again, I'm talking about fresh lean pork, and this is a composite score where we derive the daily values from. But when it comes to selenium, fresh lean pork provides 68% of the daily value of selenium. So it's just an extremely high source of selenium that I know is a surprise to many people, even dietitians, when you talk about pork. And then when it comes to being a good source, we have pantothenic acid, phosphorus, zinc, copper, and then choline, which again, choline is a little bit of a surprise, I think, to some people. Fresh lean pork provides about 10% of the daily value of choline. And I think, in recent years, we've understand more about the importance of choline when it comes to maternal and baby health. And so, again, a little known fact that not everyone knows or understands about pork.
Yes, and I've talked about choline a few times on the podcast, so it's nice to know that pork is a good source of choline as well. And you mentioned selenium. I haven't really talked about that on the podcast, so can you share briefly, why is selenium important? What does it do?
Well, low selenium status may be linked with age-related declines in brain function and cognition, possibly due to less availability of the antioxidant roles selenium plays in brain health regulations. So, again, related to brain function and cognition decline in older adults. But as mentioned earlier, pork is one of those richest food sources of selenium, an important part to add to your diet.
Just random fun fact, when I was in graduate school at the University of Missouri in Columbia, our food and nutrition department was doing a bunch of research on selenium. So not a nutrient that you hear much about.
It's not. And what's interesting and fun about working at the National Pork Board, when you start talking to swine nutritionists and you talk about the feed and what the animals are consuming and how that translates to the product, it gets really interesting as we talk about these nutrients that we know as we look at the nutrition facts, but then also how that can be impacted. At least in pigs, it's different than in cows because they are monogastric. So again, what they eat and how that translates into the food is just fascinating, I think, especially when it comes to selenium.
Yeah. And I was also wondering if you could speak to, I mentioned in the introduction about plant-forward eating patterns. So I would love to hear more about, we're talking about pork and animal source food. How does it help people follow a more plant-forward eating pattern?
Well, I think pork makes it easy to follow a plant-forward eating pattern. And as mentioned earlier, this whole idea of a carrier food, pork can be that perfect carrier of underconsumed vegetables or fruits and nutrients that can actually help people eat better. So if you think of pork as a really tasty ingredient when you're cooking something like an egg roll in a bowl, where ground pork is kind of the protein that brings it all together along with, a bunch of vegetables like shredded carrots and cabbage and red peppers. It's, again, one of those carrier foods that helps you maybe consume those vegetables or nutrients that people struggle to eat. So that's just one example, but the whole idea of pork being a perfect pair to all foods.
Yeah, it makes sense. You're going to pair it with dishes that, you could encourage in the intake of especially other vegetables and things like that. It's making me hungry, actually, as we're talking. So we've been talking about fresh lean pork, and you've mentioned a few cuts by name, but I wanted to make sure that we're explaining what exactly does a lean cut of pork mean? How many cuts are there? Even with lean, there's still some fat in the pork. So can you speak to the amount of fat, the type of fat, and anything else regarding that you think is important to share?
Well, there are actually 8 cuts of pork that meet USDA guidelines for lean, and lean meaning that they contain less than 10 grams of fat per 3-ounce serving. So some of the more popular cuts that most people have heard of would be the pork tenderloin. And then when it comes to chops, you have different types of chops, but most of those qualify for lean. And then when it comes to ground pork, look for the 96% lean ground pork. And of course, you can't forget the pork roast, such as the New York pork roast. And we also have a few cuts that qualify for the American Heart Association Heart Check certified foods, because those actually classify as extra lean. And that's the boneless pork sirloin roast, as well as the pork tenderloin. And I think another little known fact that people don't know and I'm excited to share today is that pork is actually 16% leaner and 27% lower in saturated fat compared to about 20 years ago. So not a lot of people know that, but our pork producers have been working really hard over the last few decades to make this change happen based upon, consumer demand. So they've made a leaner product that's out on the market.
Awesome.
And in fact, primarily the type of fat found in lean pork is a monounsaturated fat called oleic acid. So of course we know the same fat that's found in olive oil or avocados, but that's the primary type of fat found in lean pork that a lot of people don't know and they don't understand either.
Okay, thank you for sharing some of those nutrition facts. I do think they're really interesting, especially the unsaturated fat. And it's maybe not top of mind for people. So it's always a good refresher if we did know this. And if we didn't, I think it's really interesting. I also wanted to ask you, I have had the opportunity to visit a small hog farm once, but most people don't have that opportunity. So glad to hear that you've got some virtual tours that you've done, at least in the past. But what can you tell our listeners about hog farming, especially for those of us who may not get the chance to go visit one in person?
Well, first of all, I would say pork producers, they work hard day in and day out to produce a safe, nutritious, and affordable protein. This is just part of what they do each and every day, and it's something that they're extremely passionate about. I'd also say that farming is generational, so good practices means a sustainable future that you can hand down to future generations. So this isn't a business that you get into when you just want to get in and get rich quick and cut corners and then get out. It truly is a long-term investment and part of a legacy that producers want to hand down to their children and their grandchildren. So many farms and ranches, are multi-generations even working together. And so my farm and ranch in Nebraska, we actually hit 100 years that it's been in the family. So this isn't uncommon. And I think people don't understand, too, the business side of the investment that farmers and producers are investing. Again, they're in it for the long haul. So good practices and producing a safe, nutritious product is built into what they do because they know it's the right thing to do. And then they're also invested because when it comes to farming, the equipment alone, you could spend $500,000 on a piece of equipment that you use 1 to 2 times a year.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking about a combine when you harvest corn and wheat or soybeans. It's a $500,000 investment. So it's not something where you get in and you cut corners. Like, this is their livelihood. This is what they wake up to day in and day out. This is where, they don't take the days off and they're working on the farm with the animals and doing what they love because they truly are passionate about it and they love doing what they do. And I will tell you, they feel a sense of pride in being part of feeding and nourishing the world. That's something that they take to heart and they do for their own family. So I think a lot of people don't understand that because they haven't had that experience, having been on a farm. But just like you and me, we care about what we do, as do they.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just have to give a shout out to our dietitian hog farmer friend, Charlotte Ramarheim, and her husband, Steve Ramarheim, in South Dakota. Hopefully, when you give a shout out to somebody, then you run the risk of excluding other people. But I have to, say thank you for all the hard work that they do on behalf of the pork producers and all of the pork producers. Thank you for all the hard work that you do. And I understand that you have some kind of interesting research that you've done regarding methane. Can you share that with us?
Oh, yes. Wow, that takes me way back to college. I was actually doing some research, and who would have known it would be so trendy now. But again, I told you at the beginning, I was a pre-med major, so I thought, well, I have to do research. This would be a good experience, and it would help boost my resume for med school. So I actually accepted a role in animal science department to do research because it was close to all my nutrition classes. Oddly, all of our classes were over on a campus that was close to the animal science building, so it was super convenient. And the research that I was doing is we were looking at ways to reduce methane production in cows. So I feel like a little bit I was ahead of my time, but also, again, interesting to see how the worlds of sustainability and nutrition are kind of coming together. And as dietitians, we have to kind of stretch ourselves and our expertise to understand more about sustainability and how that comes together to complete the story with nutrition. So I just think that, one thing we talk about, not only is pork good for you when it comes to providing the nutrients and nutrition that we need, but it's also good for the planet. And the sustainability of U.S. produced pork keeps improving. So you talked about Charlotte and Steve and what they do in South Dakota, and they're not alone. The 60,000 producers across the U.S. continue to improve the way they produce pork. And per pound of pork produced since 1960, farmers are actually using about 75% less land, about 25% less water, and 7% less energy is used, while 7% less carbon is emitted. So again, that commitment to continuous improvement and something that they're invested in to hand down generation to generation, and something they want to be sustainable for their family and futures to come. So really interesting stuff when it comes to sustainability.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things that I'm always saying on the podcast when it comes to sustainability, it's not, is it sustainable or not? It's, are we heading in the right direction? Are we better than we were yesterday? And there's a lot of trade-offs and there's a lot of complexity to it. But kudos to all the farmers and producers out there who are doing all the work to continually improve sustainable nutrition, sustainable agriculture. And Kara, that's one more thing that we have in common, because I did my master's research on cows. So talk about that a lot on the show.
Oh my goodness.
Not going to get into that, but more on the biotechnology side than the sustainability side. But there were factors that involved the sustainability aspect. So won't get into that now. But is there anything else that you wanted to share about the nutrition, the research, about fresh, lean pork, pork and partners? Any takeaways for people listening, whether they're a health professional or not?
Well, I do actually want to make a final point when it comes to sustainability, because I like how you frame that up. And when it comes to sustainability, we can't just look at one piece of the puzzle, but looking at, the environmental side, looking at the nutrition, looking at the economics, the accessibility, affordability. You kind of have to look at all of these pieces, because what happens if one piece is missing? So what could those unintended consequences be? And we are looking at some research that shows the unintended consequences. If you were to remove pork from your diet, there's a lot of factors to consider, but we always have to look at what are those unintended consequences.
Yes. And I like how you also mentioned earlier the cultural aspect too. And that's the human aspect of sustainability. It's not just the environmental impact, it's that whole picture.
Absolutely. And when it comes to the cultural applicability, another area of focus that I haven't mentioned, but because you bring it up, it's really important to us, is looking at research that not only understands how do we create more culturally relevant foods. And again, we've talked about pork being widely consumed. So what's our role in this? How can we help develop better research and clinical trials that have culturally relevant foods? Because once that research is done, how do you then translate that? And how does that translate into action for the consumer? So how are health professionals translating it? But then how is a client then able to maintain it? So if you start off in a research trial with food that's unknown to specific cultures, your adherence in acceptability rates are going to be really low.
Mm-hmm.
So we're also really championing and trying to find ways to create more culturally relevant foods that are in clinical trials. And then how do we then translate that so that you can get recipes and ways for clients to be able to actually apply those in real life scenarios?
Absolutely. Well, thank you for that. We've touched on a lot of different important aspects about pork and cultural healthy eating patterns. But I did want to ask you, since you have this interesting background working in the food industry, a lot of students or other dietitians are also interested in working with commodity boards like the National Pork Board. So if you have any advice for them and how they can take their career in that direction, I would love to hear that.
Well, for students, I would say yes to things that scare you.
Mm-hmm.
So when it comes to new opportunities, we're quick to think that there's a very clear path because we've heard it from our mentors, our professors, or, there's a very clear path that you must take. But I think if something scares you a bit, say yes, see where it goes, see what challenges are ahead of you and what skills you can build out of it. Because that's kind of the path I took, was saying yes to things that I didn't know much about and, trying to find the necessary skills to complement, my nutrition background. So I would say that's a big thing to, say yes to things that might scare you, but then also making connections. We know that. So looking for summer internships and job experiences where you can make connections and see where your interests lie. That's always really important. And just, again, looking to build those necessary skills outside of nutrition. So I was doing animal science research back in college. I was working at a grocery store. I was even a waitress in food service, and I worked in a hospital in the dish room. So again, just trying to find what really interests me, because again, I was told there's a very clear path and, 1 + 1 = 2, and this is what you need to do. But as I had all these different experiences, I began to find what it was that I truly was passionate about. And then once I found that, I just started seeking out those opportunities. And even when an opportunity wasn't available, I would create the opportunity and say, this is why you need to hire a registered dietitian and what value I can bring to your organization. So that's my best advice.
Great. The more you talk, the more we have in common. It's hilarious. As we're wrapping up, please share where people can find more information, websites, social. I'm sure there are recipes. I'm sure there's research, but let us know where we can find more information and what we might find there.
Well, I'm going to encourage all of your listeners to go to pork.org. That's where they're going to find more information about the Pork and Partners program. So get signed up, become a partner. I want to get to know you. I want to get to know you better and hear about the great work you're doing. So that will be pork.org/porkandpartners. We'll also be on Instagram. Again, that will be Pork and Partners. And of course, connect with me. I would love to connect with more dietitians or aspiring healthcare professionals or people inside and outside of the industry. So would love to connect with you personally on social media.
Excellent. Thank you. And I will have all of those links and any resources that we talked about in the show notes at soundbitesrd.com. So Kara, thank you for coming on the show and sharing all of this information with us. And for everybody listening, as always, enjoy your food with health in mind. Till next time.
For more information, visit soundbitesrd.com. Music by Dave Burke, produced by Jag in Detroit Podcasts.